Hello, welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today we have a special guest. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your name. It's Mouaz. How do you say your name? Do you mind to say your own name for me?
Muaz. Hi, Alan.
Mouaz. Okay. How are you?
I produce myself, Mouaz Al-Shahmeh, software engineer and developer, Google Dev Library author in Flutter and Dart technologies. Maybe last week I meet with the Google Dev Library Googler, employer Sebastian. I talked about Meta SEO, my package Meta SEO, which enhance web apps of Flutter web apps, enhance it to support search engine optimization. This topic from website. I have the Bachelor's in Information Technology and Computing. Now I study Master in Web Sciences. I do many of websites, maybe more than 20 websites, live websites in many technologies for backend technologies, and maybe more than 40 games published into stores. Yes, and have many good rates in stores.
So we're here to talk about Flutter. So we call it Flutter Networking, Advanced Flutter Networking, basically how to work with the network, such as, internet, in an advanced way. So this is talking about caching, pagination, retry policies within Flutter itself. So, have you run into network issues while developing Flutter applications?
Yes, Alan, thank you for the question. Maybe before the network advanced topics in network, if you let me make some introduction about internet network.
Please go ahead.
Yes. The internet maybe work as server side and client side. Yes. Both gathering information and connection between server side and client side. This make apps or applications run, and the websites in general runs correct. The connection between the server and client, this is we focus in this meeting, the connection. So you heard about HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTPS secure, if you talk about secure connection. The image of networking illustrated as I see it before, as client and server side. From Flutter perspective, you deal with client side. Until now, you deal with client side in Flutter. In Dart programming language, you deal with server side. And you deal with the client side with Dart programming language. Until now, no connection between Flutter and Dart as server side and client side. You feel the missing link between Flutter and Dart as connection between server and the client. We discuss this in details later. HTTP, as I said, or UDP, this make the internet work now. HTTP request response, you have the information or data. This make the internet work or network between apps or websites. So in this meeting, we focus on advanced Flutter networking. We talked before, Flutter, we deal with it until now as client side as web. We focus on caching and pagination and retry policies. This is most three important topics to know to make advanced web apps in Flutter. and make resistance for web apps, professional web apps. Make performance to these web apps in Flutter.
Well, I think the main issue that people end up having is maybe a not so good network, right?
Yes.
So I live in Hong Kong. We have some islands that are a little bit, the network is not so good. And I have to somehow deal with that,
Yes.
right? Is there some mechanisms built into Dart or built into Flutter SDK itself that will help me to deal with this kind of bad network issue?
Yes, thank you for the question. From the main topics we discussed on this meeting for retry policies. If you face these problems, for example, with network or with application request for the HTTP, maybe delay the request or delay the response from the response of the HTTP. If you don't want the application is crashed down, this maybe you handle this problem by retry policies.
Okay. Now the retry policy, right? How can I make something like that? What do I need to do? Like, what would be like step one if I need to have some kind of retry mechanism?
Yes. For retry policies, when this problem face you, this problem happens when the failed network request, as we talked before, when you deal with HTTP, you deal as request and response. You send request and have response. You send request whenever the HTTP method, for example, get, post, bot, options, delete, whatever the option, the method of HTTP request. So when you send request and you don't have the response directly or after a while, this is the problem of retry policies. You need to do something called retry policies. When this problem happens, for example, as you talked before, poor connectivity, for example, of internet, you send request and request not accessed or not moved to the server side from problem of connectivity of internet, for example. Another problem is server errors. Another thing, return back. When HTTP, you deal with HTTP, as we talked, there is methods of HTTP, as we talked, get, post, bot, delete, options, whatever. Another thing with the HTTP request, you have response. There is standard of response, numbers enumerated as classification of responses. It is standard now in web. Maybe 100 of okay, 100, 200 is okay, 201 is created, whatever of 200, classified into numbers. 300 is moved or whatever. 400 or 404 is famous one. 404 is not found. Another thing, responses from server side errors. 500. 500, this errors named as server side errors. Okay. These errors, you need to do something named retry policies with these problems of server side problems. For example, endpoint not exist, endpoint moved, maybe parameters for request changed or nothing, or something missed, or authentication needed, whatever. This errors name it as server side errors. Now, how to deal with these problems? with retry policies, and you need to make your Flutter app resilience and confident app. So you need to, maybe many of people talk about this problem, or experts of Flutter talk it in details in this problem, because it's famous problem in networking in general. But here we will focus in 2 or 3 gold things to do in dealing with this problem. First one is the how many times you retry policy. There is a famous package in Flutter named as DU. Many of the as you deal with Flutter as client side. Yes. With Flutter, many of packages you can deal with it. One of them HTTP, one of them DU. There is in DU as retry, how many retry times? For example, 3 times and crash the network, or appear the error of networking, for example, in your app. There is error in connection, for example. You deal with this. After, for example, 5 times of error of networking or retry the connection, appear this in as no connection or whatever. Another thing, this first one is how many times retry the connection if it's failed. This first. Second, waiting between one request to another request. Delay. There is in Flutter something named future delayed. For example, 1 second, millisecond, whatever, microsecond, whatever of time. You specify the time between request and the next request. This is second. Also, if you want, if you don't want to use future delayed, there is in Dart something named isolate. With isolate, you can do the same thing as future delayed or async programming, is parallel programming. Isolate, you can call the function as sleep function, delay the request. Yes, make sleep before the next request. This second topic. First is how many times of request. Second is waiting between requests. And the third or last thing, you deal with the failed retry after waiting, after number of retries. You finish the connection, because handle of leaks, for example, in memory, in networking, whatever. Finish the connection with the network after times you specified in your app. For example, 3 times of failed request, and waiting between request and other request. You access the point of finishing failed requests. Then you, for example, appear to the user failed request or failed internet connection, whatever. This is the third thing I illustrate in this problem, retry policies in Flutter network. Yes.
Well, it's good that you kind of, how do you say, you need to make sure you understand what kind of error you have, then you know how and if you should retry, right? Like you said, if it's a server error, maybe not always retry, because it could be some bug on their side. Could also be bad input on your side too, right?
Yes.
It could be multiple issues that may be happening, and or even like you said, broken path or some kind of path which is incorrect. I mean, if you retry that, it's not going to do much difference so quickly, right?
Yes, thank you for the question. Maybe if you are the developer of the web app or the application, the Flutter application, you know the paths, or call it in web science endpoint. Endpoint. If you let me talk more about this endpoint. Endpoint, the URL. If you hit URL in the browser, click enter. Almost you call the get method in the browser. Behind the URL, there is something called backend. Maybe the problem until now not solved in Flutter. Maybe Jasper, something like Jasper, good work in this topic, server-side rendering. The link between Flutter as a front end and back end of Dart programming language is missing until now. I talked many times with the Googler and the Flutter team about this problem. Maybe need some big work to solve this issue, but okay. Flutter as front end or UI, user experience, whatever. Dart, there is a shelf package. You deal with server side, but the connection between shelf and Flutter is missing until now. Yes, you deal with backend. Backend, there are many technologies in backend with the web. But for example, PHP programming language, if you deal with frameworks as Laravel, Symfony, ENG, whatever of PHP programming language, because it's more than 30 years for first edition. Yes. If you deal with the Python, Flask, or Django, whatever. If you deal with the .NET, C#, whatever of programming language, .NET of Microsoft. If you deal with the Elixir or Erlang, you deal with the Phoenix framework, MVC framework. Yes. Whatever of back-end technology, you prepare the API. Call it API, Application Programming Interface. So you deal with API, prepare the back-end. Back-end as service. Now, famous thing is as back-end as a service is Firebase and Supabase. You deal with Flutter as with Firebase and Supabase. These things as back-end as a service. Do the homework from you and prepare the back-end to you. You deal with it as back-end as a service. If you don't think this, you don't want this, same I prepare or I prefer do my homework in backend, do everything, especially in big applications. You need to modify everything in backend. You prepare the backend as API, Application Programming Interface. You prepare the paths and parameters. If you do something next step, you do something as authentication, authorization, whatever, auth2 or whatever the method you have in authentication, bearer or whatever of feeder security. This is security things to save the back end or the server. You do something related to security things, authorization or authentication, whatever. You have the URL or path, HTTP or HTTPS / www whatever / for example persons. In backend, you prepare this as, for example, get method or post method, whatever. In this idea, maybe you know the URL. If you are the developer of the website and the application, you know the URL and you know the method and you know the, for example, API key, for example, authentication method you prepare, to save the backend, the server, and the client. These topics, if you are the developer, you know, but not this problem you face it in real Flutter applications or published applications. Published applications, for example, connection internet of a client of user application. For example, user install the application from the store. Maybe connection network, for example, error, or because you prepare everything in the app and publish the app. So the connection, for example, or HTTP or HTTPS not supported. These problems you can handle by retry policies. Yes.
Yeah, but I'm also thinking too. So you connected to a server and it's actually returning an invalid code, right? Because you can actually change the response code on the server side. So if the response of the server is different than, so the response data is different than the response code. Does that make sense? So it could be a server error, but they're returning, like 200 for some strange reason. Is there a way that I can protect myself from this kind of problem?
Yes, thank you for the question. This maybe lead us to another topic. Maybe Facebook published the technology named GraphQL. GraphQL, you don't need to prepare the server side and the front end side or client side. There is one endpoint in GraphQL. I talked maybe more than 2 hours in this topic in my YouTube channel about GraphQL and how to deal with the Flutter. GraphQL, you prepare one endpoint for all the application, one endpoint. After preparing the endpoint of the GraphQL, the work now in the front end, in client side, not in server side. In client side, you send what you want and the response you have as you want. In client side, not in server. All the work in client side, in mutations and whatever, in GraphQL technology. Yes, maybe this solve many problems in RESTful API or REST APIs about multi endpoints. The GraphQL endpoint, one endpoint, and you have all you want in one endpoint in client side. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I use GraphQL a lot for my backends, right? And I remember what you're saying, where with GraphQL you can send. The nice part is that you can easily traverse your data. You can get only the data that you want. But the bad part is that no matter what the response is, you're always going to get I think it's a 200 response. I forgot, or 202, because every request is a post request.
Yes.
Even if you're doing something that a GET request would normally do. And but if there's an error, you still get a valid 200 something response, right? So you're saying for that case in particular, I have to actually look at the payload itself to figure out what the error could be.
I don't understand the question. You have the response 200. Okay, response from server side.
Yeah. So with GraphQL, basically, as I understand, every response is always like 200 or 202. I can't remember which one it is.
Yes.
Even if the response is not good. Yeah, so that's the confusing part. So you cannot only rely on just the error status code. You have to also take a look at the payload itself. What's coming back from the server.
Yes, the response as JSON, for example. Yes. The response itself. Yes.
No, I say it can be quite annoying because the response code, I think most people are used to that. Let's look at the response code and let's look at the response itself. But with GraphQL, if you look at the response code, looks good.
Sure, yes.
But the response data itself could be bad.
Yes, thank you. There is something in HTTP post there is something called body. In HTTP, whatever the HTTP method, there is a header and body of the response or the request. There is header and body. If you have the response as 200, okay, you have the body. In body, there is, for example, JSON or XML, extensible markup language. You have the JSON, and you deal with JSON in your application. Encode or decode the JSON. This is the question, or?
Yes. Because for GraphQL, even if you have an error, it's going to return back a valid response.
Yes, with GraphQL, the same as RESTful APIs. You deal with JSON. Is a fast networking JSON technology, JavaScript object notation. If you deal with old APIs, you deal with XML, extensible markup language. You deal with the SOAP technology. SOAP, yes. Maybe now every technologies in web communicate with the JSON, especially, but the government or financial government or financial companies, you deal with XML for security things. To connect between server and the client, you deal with the XML. But now in GraphQL and RESTful APIs, you deal with the JSON, JavaScript, yes, JavaScript object notation as a key and value.
But I'm saying GraphQL, the specification for GraphQL itself is you basically only get 200 and only sometimes 500. So there could be a server-side error, but you're still getting 200 response. Or what you can also do with GraphQL is you can send multiple queries or mutations at the same time in the same request. Some can fail, some can succeed. So you need to go through the payload or the body, as you call it, itself to see what's failed and what's succeeded.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Now you pass the retry policies problem. You have the response. Now you have the response. The next step, you deal with the response as a body of response. Yes. But we talked before about retry policies. You have not the response or error of response. Yes. Sure, you deal with the response, the correct response or done responses. Yes. You deal with your app as you architect these responses or build these responses.
Now, to deal with these responses, like I think it's quite clear that for certain errors we need to retry. Some we should not retry. But now the question is, how can I structure my code so that I can easily handle this problem in just a few places rather than all throughout my code? Is there a way that I should maybe wrap my HTTP class with something to retry? Like, how do you usually handle this problem? I mean, you don't like copy and paste your duplication code. You don't copy and paste duplicated code everywhere, right? Do you write like a class wrapper around like DIO, or are you using something else, or how do you usually do it?
Yes, thank you for the question. This is a deep question in networking. As we talked before in HTTP, you deal with HTTP request or response as text or file. This is the standard of HTTP request or response. You deal with text or file. Maybe something named FTP, File Transfer Protocol. No, now you deal with HTTP with file or HTTP or text in HTTP request and response. In response, for example, text, if you have the text from response of HTTP, you can here make named defensive programming, try catch, for example, whatever of handling the response, try catch or use case, switch case, for example, whatever you prefer the way to handle the response. And according to this response, you make something in your app. For example, 200, okay, all of them 200 the response. But in the body, you prepare the backend or server side with the messages, for example, of this response. According to these messages, make something in your app.
Now, how do you usually handle this? Are you making a separate class that handles all the HTTP calls?
Yes, as a Dart programming language. In programming, not maybe many of methods to solve this issue, for loop or switch case, whatever, while loop or do while loop, whatever of programming concept. But the important thing, you handle all the responses as you build them in backend. All of them according to business logic or requirements of your app or system. Functional requirement or non-functional requirement, yes.
Yeah, I just remembered something that happened that's actually happening in a project of mine, is that we have rate limiting, and actually you have to examine the header for the response of when you should try again. So that's another thing to think about too, that maybe not many people think about, is rate limiting. Usually that's for third-party APIs. They don't want you to use them too much, so they'll try to stop you and delay you from trying again. So that's a really good thing to also keep in mind.
Maybe this topic in server side, something named CORS, cross-origin resource sharing.
Oh yeah, all developers hate CORS. It's not easy to deal with.
Yes, but this is a preferred security way to save your server side.
Yeah.
Yes. CORS, cross-origin resource sharing, you prepare all the backend, but you have the access or accessibility to something from your API, for example, specified URLs or paths with the specific function or work. Yes. Not open all your backend to all people. Yes. This named the CORS in web technologies. Yes.
Well, it's good. Can you actually explain CORS to the audience? Because I don't know if everybody knows what is CORS. Of course, you and I both know CORS, though. Do you mind to give a quick explanation of CORS?
Yes, thank you, Alan. As I talked before, CORS to make something security for your website or server side, you make CORS links. You specify the links to open sharing in server side and the client side. Return back to the first of this meeting. We have in web technologies, server side and client side. CORS, this issue appears where or when this technology appears, when you deal from server to server, you need something called CORS, CORS, to make a calling from server to server or from server to client. If you into the same server, you don't need the CORS. If, for example, if you programming in PHP, you make directly connection with backend database, directly connection. You don't need CORS. Or if you make CORS, don't affect your working. But if you deal with server to server side, for example, third-party services, if you deal with, for example, SMS service or Google Maps, for example, whatever, Google Maps service as third-party, named the third-party services, you need CORS. Here, CORS, the importance of CORS. CORS make security of resources of your server. So a layer of security about resources of your server. This thing save your server side from attacks, for example, whatever, to save your paths in your server side. So, for example, in your website, you have login, for example, or create account. You don't need to this login to access it from HTTP request or response from outside your website. Something called XSS or CSRF. you make a cookie key in your website to save you the links in your website to accept these functions or calls from your website. You make something random key, call it the CSRF or XSS. This key randomly generated. This save your website from outer attacks. The same here, cores, complementary of this topic. Cores, if another from outside your website, send request to your website for example, login URL. If you have cores in your server side, you deny this call.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
The things that people really hate about cores is usually it's only in the browser that's really a problem, right? Rather than on the server side.
Cores related to API in general, yes.
What may end up happening for some people is they make this API and they make their Flutter app, and maybe they're using Mac or Windows to access it, works fine, and then they export their Flutter app as web, and then nothing's working because they have to actually handle this cores issue, because usually it's a browser issue than an API issue necessarily.
You need to access from your server side to open this cores from your server side.
Yeah, the browser will tell you if it, what's the origin it should be.
Yes, maybe if you search, if you need more information about this topic, you search in MDN, Mozilla Firefox documentation about this. You have advanced explanation of this topic. Cores MDN. If you search about this, yes, you have all information about cores, where you use it. Yes, CORS MDN.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the XSS, right? That's the cross-site,
cross-origin resource sharing. Yes.
Yeah, that's the issue. Most frameworks have something built in for this, so you have to look in to see which framework you're using, and you may also run into this problem with S3. S3 also has a cores issue you need to solve.
Yes.
Even for uploading files to like S3 or Firebase, you need to also set your cores policy, right? So even if you're not running your own backend, you need to also handle this stuff. And I think Superbase probably also. I haven't tried Superbase,
yes,
but I'm guessing you probably need to also set this up too. So it's not just only custom backend; it's for basically anywhere where users need to send a request.
Of course, yes. Web technology, security, web technology, yes.
Yeah, definitely. So you're running into this issue, and you can only really see the problem if you're using this in the browser. You can only really see this within the console, that web console or something. I don't know, was it JavaScript console? It'll tell you the error there, because with JavaScript usually it fails and doesn't tell you what's going on. So you have to take a look to see why it's not working. Now, you also brought up about pagination within our email. Like, how do you usually handle pagination within your apps?
Yes, we have another topics in advanced networking in Flutter. First, retry policies. Another thing is caching and pagination. The same idea in retry policies. The pagination, you don't need, for example, the record you have in response, for example, 1,000 record. You don't need all of 1,000 record. You need, for example, first 10, for example, ads. For first 10 ads. I developed the Tadawul real estate application. In this application, I developed pagination. This topic is famous in, for example, ads applications or e-commerce applications. You need pagination. What is pagination? Pagination, for example, you need the first 10 records from your response. After that, for example, if you scroll down, download another 10 topics, 10 records, until you have the last one. In Flutter, you have a scroll controller. in list view and grid view. Preferred way in Flutter, list view builder dot builder, grid view dot builder. You have controller in both list view or grid view. You have to use scroll controller. Yes, with scroll controller you make pagination in web Flutter app. Another thing is caching. Caching in web in Flutter web apps, you need something named caching. Caching, what is caching? The saving of response in your app to a period. Why you use this? You use this to save resources, to minimize the request and response of your HTTP. You have caching in your app. There are many technologies or packages in Flutter. You can do caching with it. For example, HTTP cache. Another thing, if you need to work locally, many plugins or packages in Bob.dev. One of them SQLite or SQF entity if you deal with ORM. You have the response from HTTP and save it locally in your app or your application as a local database, SQLite or SQF entity or Hive, whatever. One hint in SQLite, if you develop many versions of your SQLite or SQF entity, this problem you face it if you, for example, develop big programs such as ERP, entity relation, ERP of companies, management of companies, or smaller than ERP, accounting program or sales program. You need to update the features of your app. If you deal as locally, I developed many of ERP applications, website or Flutter applications. Yes. And you need to update features as locally or the website. Now we talk about locally SQLite. If you don't want the crash of your app, if you change the SQLite tables, something named version of SQLite. You need to update the version every update on your tables or schema in your SQLite or SQF entity. Or Hive, if you want to use boxes, name it box in Hive. Yes, these things. Another thing in caching, maybe you have image cache package, name it cached network image. This is useful to cache the image you received from server side. You make some caching to image in your app, in your Flutter app. Now, in caching, we have two topics important, in my opinion, for caching in your Flutter application. After you have caching or you do caching of your network response, there are two topics maybe need to consider in developing your Flutter app. One thing is invalidate the cache. So you need to invalidate the cache and return to request and response of your HTTP. Here, you need to invalidate the caching. When to invalidate and return back to the connection of HTTP. This is one. The second is time of caching. How time you need to cache the response of your HTTP. In web technologies, not in Flutter, there is something called cookie in web technologies. Cookie and session. Cookie, if you specified cookie in web technologies, you need to specify the period of this cookie. For example, 1 year, 2 year, whatever of time. Yes. In application or Flutter application, the same idea. You deal with the client-side application. So you need to specify the time of your cache in your application. After this time, destroy the caching. Yes, this is two important things in caching: invalidate the cache and the time of caching. What is the time of caching? Now we talked about three important things in advanced networking in Flutter. First is caching. Second is retry. Second is pagination. Is important to handle how many records in your application you need. After that, make something called pagination. And the last thing is retry policies. Retry policies, as we talked before. Yes.
Yeah, the pagination stuff can be tricky too. Also, there's no standard pagination style for APIs, so you have to look at your API to see how that part works. I think we're starting to run a little bit low on time. We also start a little bit late. Is there anything about Flutter Advanced Networking topics that you think we need to leave people with before we close out our session?
Yes, Alan. Maybe we talked. Maybe if you develop Flutter applications, you face many of topics. One of them, three of them, as we talked: cache and pagination and retry policies. Why these topics appears? To make your application resilience and confidence in your users' experience, you need to handle these topics. Yes. To make your Flutter app, web app, or Flutter app with connection of HTTP is professional.
That's good. Well, I wanted to thank you for coming on to talk about this topic because it's super important. Not a lot of people talk about networking issues, surprisingly. But the thing is that happens a lot. The network is not very stable, especially if you're on your mobile phone. You could run out of connection very easily, and most people don't handle that kind of problem. So it's good that we talk about this.
Thank you.
So again, thank you for coming on, and I hope to have you again in the future.
Thank you, Alan.